Hey folks, welcome to the Right in the Head podcast with me, John Paul Sperling. I'm a writer and a life coach. This podcast is where we bring those two worlds together, talking about the mindset required to turn the passionate pursuit of writing into a thriving career. Coming up on today's episode. Lily Malm is a Los Angeles-based screenwriter and AFI Screenwriting Fellow from Sweden. Her work ranges from politically tinged dramas to lesbian comedies, with a focus on capturing the nuance of the female experience. Lily and I get into losing your ego as a writer, where we should go next with queer cinema, and how to mentally protect yourself when writing a character based on your own challenging experiences. Lily Malm, welcome to the Right in the Head podcast. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for hosting me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. We've got plenty to talk about. I'm very excited about this conversation around getting your ego out of the way as a writer. And I want to start with what's probably a dramatic statement, but I'm going to make that statement and then I'll ask how much you agree with the statement.
Okay.
I have always thought that getting your ego out of the way, whether you're a writer or not, but maybe even more so as a writer or anybody creative, is one of the biggest challenges and one of the most important things we can hope to do as adults trying to make it through life. How much do you agree with that?
I totally agree with that. It is the hardest thing to do because there's this human instinct to always protect it and defend ourselves and get really defensive really easily. And so that is the hardest challenge, but it is crucial to do if you ever want to have a good collaboration on set, in development or in post-production. It's important to have that in your relationships and your friendships. And it's hard. It takes a lot of work. And so I really do agree with you.
Well, we're off to a good start.
Yeah.
If you disagree, this would be a very short episode. When was it first kind of put on your radar that this was an important thing? Was there a specific incident that you looked back on and thought, ooh, that was not good behavior on my part? Was there one of those, two of those, or a whole collection of those, and gradually it sunk in?
As a writer or as a human?
Let's do as a human, I think, because that's writers are a very specific breed. So let's do as a human to start with.
Sure. I think the first time I was dumped was whoa, that was a huge thing, a huge blow to my ego. And I didn't understand that there is a separation between you as a human and the thing in that voice in your head that just won't shut up. And so getting dumped was that was the first time that I'm oh wait, there's actually I'm not my ego. There is a distinction to be made, and that was heartbreaking. But it forced me to read up about the human ego, how it works, why we have it, and that was the first catalyst, if you will, that really launched the conversation for me.
Yeah, there's nothing like a good breakup to trigger that ego response. Yeah.
For sure.
Unfortunately, most people have to go through that. Well, maybe not unfortunately, because it's a learning curve, isn't it? You've just said there that you dived into this. So why do we have the ego? What is the ego? Let's double click on that, because I love talking about this, and maybe this would be beneficial for, I think, quite a few listeners. What is, from your experience, from your research, what have you discovered about what the ego even is?
Well, actually, it's funny that you mentioned that because last week I heard a new definition of it that I'd never heard before. And it's gotten me, yeah. So I took this seminar last week, and the professor who ran that seminar said that he said that it was important to have an ego. And everybody was like, whoa, what do you mean by that? Because I think of the ego as that, that bitch in my head who just shares my brain, but he was like, no, it's important to have an ego, because he defined it as confidence, which I disagree with. But I think there is an important middle ground, because I think of it as my worst enemy. He thinks it's the best thing ever. And I'm I think it's somewhere in between. I think it's important to know what you bring to the table and have enough of, self-confidence to actually, not just take every note that you're given as a writer, because that's just people pleasing, right? And it's important to kind of find that middle ground where that, hey, my vision does matter. I do have important thoughts too, and I know what I bring to the table, but I'm not going to be so confident that I'm arrogant. So I think it's somewhere in between. How do you define it?
So a couple of things. What you just said there reminded me of something I read a very long time ago, and I forget the name of the book now, but it was the difference between being grandiose and having grandeur. I was really interested in this, and I think it's the difference between ego and confidence. So having grandeur is being aware that you are amazing, but also acknowledging that everybody else is amazing too. Being grandiose is thinking you're the only one that's amazing.
Right. And we see a
So
lot of that. Yeah.
in both cases, you think you're amazing. It's just having grandeur is I extend this greatness to everybody around me also. And I
I,
think that's confidence, whereas ego is more like being grandiose. So
I, yeah, and I agree with that because we see a lot of that, like in the film industry for sure. I mean, there's that term, like the auteur, like the person who's like whose sole vision we're kind of shaping and creating as fellow collaborators. But that's just very almost like borderline narcissistic because hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, can work on a film. So why should we just give the credit to that one director, that one producer? Like, it's a collaborative art form, and
yeah,
so it's
it takes a
important.
village.
Yeah, it takes a village, and it's important to like kind of dissect like, who did what, and like how did those voices get merged together, and how did they collaborate and together create the story that we're now watching, versus just giving one person the credit. And I think we see a lot of that grandiose, kind of mindset in this industry, unfortunately.
Hmm. I'm now freaking out because I may have got grandiose and grandeur the wrong way around. I'm just thinking, wait,
Oh,
which one of them meant sharing it with everybody, the other one meant just thinking it was just you. I forget which way around it was.
one of
Maybe
them,
people
one of
will
them.
people can correct me in the comments. Going back to how I define the ego, because I do want to touch on that. I have a background of studying things like anthropology, evolution, neurology. So for me, the ego, at least the part that I'm constantly trying to deal with, is my survival mechanism, is my defense mechanism. So I'm I process things as, why do I have this drive in the first place? So why is it that I get upset when somebody says that my work isn't good, it's not what they're looking for? Well, because it's a form of being told that you're wrong, and we have this underlying need to be right because back in days of, being
Cavemen.
tribal humans,
Yeah.
being wrong would have meant potential being
Death.
ostracized and therefore dying. Yeah, exactly. And then we have the energy conservation of it all. So I don't want to be told my work isn't great because that means I have to go back and do more work. And I really don't want to do that because humans are just inherently lazy. We're just trying to preserve calories as much as we can. So there's a
Yes.
biological element to it. And then I think I layer on top of that this societal programming that is, as children, we get told that it's a good thing to be right, and we get praised for being right by our primary caregivers, typically our parents. And so what that kind of creates for us is this narrative that I must be right in order to be loved. And it's one of the jobs as an adult is to unpick that and think, actually, we're not tribal anymore. I'm perfectly safe. No one's going to kill me because my script isn't good enough, and I'm pretty sure my parents are still going to love me. So
Right.
it's kind of undoing a few million years worth of evolution and a few years of being brought up in a Western society. That's how I would very, very that's my long explanation of what the ego is to me.
Yeah.
It's I call it the other guy. It's just the guy that's technically looking out for my safety, but is
Mhm.
very confused by modern life and what should even be classed as a threat.
Yeah, I mean, we've I think as humans, as a race, we've progressed so fast that our bodies are not just catching up yet. They're still like learning how to like help us navigate social media and and the rise of of it's not we're not built for this environment that we're currently in. I think society's gone way too fast, and so therefore, we have this need to uh, like kind of listen to the instincts that we're born with as a
Hmm.
species, and they're
Hmm.
not helping us. I think sometimes the best thing you can do is to listen to your ego just for a few seconds, but then go do the exact opposite, because usually that's going to be what's healthy for you versus just
Yeah.
like listening to or like just doing what your brain tells you to do, because that can be horrendous for your mental health and
Hmm.
for your ability to listen and communicate. And it can really like if you lean too far into your ego, like your whole life's going to collapse, And so it's really important to like listen, but just long enough to hear what it has to say, but then just go do the exact opposite.
Yeah, it is kind of like that. There's that it's a messenger for sure, as is everything that we struggle with, negative emotions, physical pain, they're all just messengers. And it's up to us to kind of decode the message and think, what do I want to do next? There's that gap between stimulus and response. So
Yeah.
that hurts. This sucks. Pause.
Mm,
What do I want to do about it? I don't need to do the first thing that comes into my head, which is often, if not always, going to be inappropriate.
right.
I'm wondering if you've had an experience you can share as a writer, because what I want to do is make sure that anybody listening to this understands what we're talking about, because they might be thinking, and this is the ego talking, I don't have this issue. I don't really have an ego. I don't get defensive. So what does it look like as a writer? Can you, anything specific to you or just in general, what does it look like to be a bit too into your ego as a writer?
Totally. So I've co-written a bunch of scripts, and sometimes when I go into like a session, we've like divided up the scenes. I write my scenes, she writes her scenes, and then we come together over Zoom, and then we talk. And every time I'm like, I nailed it. Like I crushed it. She will no notes for me. Like I nailed every line. Nothing needs to be changed. And then the first thing she says is like, no, this doesn't work. And you have to like be able to like drop that arrogance. Like, no, this is a first draft, and I think oftentimes as writers we come in with like a first draft, and we want to believe so badly that it is like the best it can be. But if we don't let ourselves dissect it, we're never going to grow as writers. And so coming into like a co-writing, session or a workshop session, I've had to like really take a deep breath here and there and just be like, you know what? No, this scene, there is something fundamentally wrong with this scene. Maybe the character isn't speaking in a way that they would naturally do in the situation. Maybe that is something that I have to go back and fix on like page two, and you have to kind of um, realize that a script is not a finished story. It's some writers hate this, but it's a blueprint. It's not a finished story. The last cut happens in the editing room. And so that's how I think about it. Like whenever I approach a note session, I tend to remind myself that like this is not a finished script. This is not everything here. Every word can be changed, and it most likely will have to change because it's hard to get it right the first time. And especially sometimes I've co-written stories where my writing partners have been closer to the community that we're writing about, or the character, the lived experience of the character. And if I don't have that lived experience, I need to shut the fuck up and listen. It's important to like remind yourself that like, hey, this person has lived this experience. I don't have that lived experience. So I can't speak to this exact scene because I haven't gone through X, Y, or Z. And you have to really learn to respect that as a writer, and really listen, because if you get something wrong, and then someone else watches that story and it's lived that experience, like, well, that's not how we talk. That's not our slang. That's not the jargon. That's not how we like, talk or walk or whatever. Like you have to learn to just shut the fuck up for a second and take that in and let them tell you how that scene needs to be portrayed for it to be authentic. And that's really important. I think authenticity is really hard to capture. It's one thing like if you're writing a sci-fi, like, or if you're creating your own world, but if you're setting it in a world where other people actually have that lived experience, it's really important to learn how to listen and not let your ego get in the way. Because if you don't have that experience, you can't dramatize it in the way that they can. So it's really important, I think, to take a deep breath and listen.
Literally take a deep breath. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Literally. It's very, very helpful. I think that what amazes me about the ego is the number of different, slightly different variations of defense it can come up with as a psychological immune system so that we don't have to just say, yeah, you're right, I was wrong. It's amazing to me. It will be, I get feedback on my scripts and I write comedy, and it will be, you know what, they just didn't understand the joke. It's not my fault. They just don't have my sense of humor. They're American. I'm British. It doesn't translate. It's not my fault.
I do the same thing. I'm like, well, that's not how Europeans talk. So like, you're wrong.
And you know what? We might be right about that.
Yeah.
But that's not the point. The point is, do you want to be right, or do you want to get the thing made? Because they're two very different things. And I think that's been my number one coping strategy since becoming a writer is I remind myself, what is my goal here? Do I want to be the person who's right about this in this moment, about this one detail? Or do I want to be the person that gets this script, the green light, into production where it's going to change a whole bunch anyway,
Right.
to
No, I
your
mean,
point?
yeah. And on that note, I'm currently co-writing a script, and he just gave me permission to talk about this. I'm co-writing a script with a guy who is very sweet, but he's very straight. And the script is lesbian themed. And there are times where I'm like, well, that's not how lesbians talk. Like, let me rewrite this,
Let me do the lesbian dialogue. Yeah.
Yeah, let me just do a lesbian pass on this to make sure it's authentic, and there are times where I'm like, just I get frustrated, you can tell. But then I'm like, you know what? No, he has a point. Like maybe this is how, how I talk. That's not how the character speaks. And that doesn't make sense to the story, or like this line that I was like so, attached to doesn't actually advance the story. It doesn't move the plot forward. It doesn't make any sense for the story. And do I want to be known as that girl who can collaborate? Or do I want to get this thing made? So that's really important too. It's like it is a collaborative sport. You're not going to do it by yourself, and so you have to kind of let go of like your own connection to it. And I think on that note too, as a human, there's this like instinct to like almost trauma dump to justify certain like creative decisions that you've made. Like, oh, I went through X, Y, or Z, or this happened after I came out, and therefore it has to be reflected just like that in the script. And if you remove that, it's no longer authentic. But what if that line doesn't work? Then what? You're just kind of walking into a brick wall. It's not going to help you. It's a dead end. And so it's really important to kind of like bite your lip if you feel like you're about to trauma dump, because trauma dumping can be very unhealthy. It's like, wouldn't you rather share that thing that you went through like in a space where it's not used as a tactic or a weapon? Because if you just like if it becomes a tactic and you're attacking someone with whatever you went through, the response is not going to be great. It's going to be a very toxic like argument, and it's not going to be healthy for you. So there are spaces where you can have a dialogue and share vulnerable experiences where you're not running the risk of like getting backlash. And so you have to learn to just keep your calm in moments where you feel like this. I know this world, I know this community, I'm part of the gay world, I've known this for many, many years. um, but you have to let go of that because you're trying to tell a story together, and not everybody on a film set is going to be queer. Most people probably will because it's LA. But not everyone's going to have the same experience. There are going to be dudes who are not lesbians on set, and they have something to share too, and they have something to add to the story, and that
Yeah.
matters too. So you
Yeah.
have to just like take a step back and be like, okay, what is the universal experience here? What about this story speaks to anybody, regardless of whether they've come out or not, or whether they've had to come out or not? Like, what is the thing that anybody of any race, any origin can relate to, and how can we tell that story together? That's more important than like, oh, this line was something that a girl told me once on Tinder. Like, it doesn't. You have to think of the story over yourself, because that's the larger thing that you're collaborating on. That's what you're all trying to create together versus sticking to your own vision no matter what. It's really unhealthy, and it's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah. Two things
Mm.
that I took away from that. One is this image of weaponized trauma. You didn't use those exact words, but you alluded to it. And that's such a powerful image. And I've
Yeah.
definitely come across people who choose to do that.
Mm.
And the other thing is, gay dudes not the same as lesbians.
Yeah.
Note made. Good point. For anybody listening that didn't already know that, that's just, there are differences.
There
There
are
are
differences
differences.
for
Even
sure.
on a film set, there are
Yeah.
differences.
Yes.
Very, very observant. So let's. I want to talk to you about. So you mentioned sort of being aware of when that ego reaction
Mm.
is happening, and we
Yeah.
said take a deep breath. Okay. Are there any other? I love giving listeners kind of practical tips, tricks, that kind of thing. Anything else that you've come across that you can use either in real time,
Mm.
or if it's an email, you've got a bit more time to reflect. Any other tools that you've come across that help to kind of dampen that egoic response and put you back in more of a sort of forward thinking mindset?
Totally. I think the first thing that comes to mind is like, don't talk shit behind people's back. Is like you are the common denominator. If people hear that you talk shit about X, Y, or Z because they don't understand X, Y, or Z, like it's gonna come back and haunt you. and you're going to be known as that person who like couldn't have that conversation with that person face to face, rather than, like it's just it's healthier for you to just when you're in an argument with somebody, first of all, yeah, take a deep breath, but then have that conversation with them. Don't just go spread rumors, because that's going to come back eventually, and it's going to, affect you and your own career going forward. So that's another thing. And then also, I would say, beyond taking a deep breath and beyond not spreading rumors or like ventilating to other people, like therapy is a great thing. I mean, meditation, like I need my like, weekly like yoga class to not to preserve some form of like self-care, because if you're always like on that, if you're always hustling and you're always like working really hard on your path, you're gonna get a very short circuit, and you're not going to be able to like bring your best self and your objective self to the set, to the development meeting, to the notes session. And so, yeah, just good self-care is really crucial. It's underestimated, but it's really important, I think, for the longevity of your own career, to think sustainably. Um, yeah,
Definitely.
that's
Definitely.
important for me.
Yeah, this is great stuff. This is great stuff. Not talking about people behind their back has
Yeah.
been a huge lesson for me. Not that I ever did it too much, and when I did it, it was more to make the people I was talking to at the time laugh. It wasn't really vindictive, but even that, I realized that it doesn't work, and it will come back to you at some point. And
Yeah.
making those judgments, it really hampers you in the future, because after you've judged somebody for behaving in any specific way, you then can't act in that way without feeling like a hypocrite. And the amount of times that after you've judged somebody's behavior, you will find yourself, funnily enough, in a situation where acting in that exact same way would benefit you. And you think, oh, wait, I just judged that person for doing that. So now what do I do? One of the
Ex-
one
yeah.
of the things about judging that I don't think people give enough thought to. It
And it
really
is.
does limit your options in the future.
No, and it is a quite small industry. Like, I mean, it's a global industry, but I mean, Hollywood is quite small town. Like, people,
Mm-hmm.
everyone's very connected, and so like you don't know who's, if you talk shit about somebody, like who do they know, and how could that impact you like three steps down the line? Like you got to
Yeah.
be careful about that stuff. And it's not what do you want your name to mean in this industry is your huge
What do
one.
you want your name to mean in this industry? I'm going to
Yeah.
write that one down. That's important. That's going in the book of valuable quotes that I've heard while doing this
Oh,
podcast.
wow.
By the way, episode 20 today, which is a milestone for me. I heard this statistic a while back that only 1 in 100 podcasts make it to episode 20. So,
Congratulations. I'm happy to be the 20th. I'm very grateful,
yay!
honored.
And also, actually, just going back to your point about how small this town can be, when I first started to do this podcast, I had no idea how I could possibly get 20 different guests. I didn't know 20 different people in this industry, but it has
Wow.
just spread so quickly because everybody that's on the show wants to recommend somebody else or two people to be on the show. So it's just I now have a lead tracking spreadsheet where I have to keep track of everybody that wants to be on the show. It's crazy. And it just to your point, it does make you think. It makes you think about how connected this town is though.
No, definitely. And I mean, very few people start podcasts all the time, but like to actually get to the 20th episode, that's discipline, that's hard work, that's consistent work. And so you should give yourself some credit, go get some happy hour treats.
I might celebrate by taking a walk. That's how I typically celebrate things. I get outside, get some sun, take a walk. I'm not really into the I can't say I'm not into the other forms of how people normally reward themselves, but I keep that quite minimal. Anyway, this episode is not about me and my eating and drinking habits. So let's circle back to ego. I think now is probably a good time to talk about your journey because I'm so interested to hear more about this. And you have done something that I have no experience with, but I have very, very close friends to me who have been through this. And it is one of the hardest things I think I've ever seen people going through, which is to come out.
Yeah.
And the impact that can have on your life, it's weird in a way to say that it could still be so impactful. You'd think we've moved on from that by now, but we clearly haven't. And it still can really impact lives in a huge way.
You're
And
right.
I love how this connects to the ego because to do that, to have the courage to do that, you're squashing your ego to oblivion at that point.
You really are.
What was the journey like for you? I do want to know about just life in general, but I suppose we should stick to as a writer, given the nature of this podcast. But
No, sure, sure. How
I mean, talk us through it as much as you're comfortable.
how dark should you want it to get?
The tone of this podcast typically is fairly light-hearted. However,
Okay.
well, yeah, but it's interesting and it's powerful. So why don't you talk at liberty? And if you see me blink 3 times, you've probably gone too far.
Fair. So, I was born in Sweden, and generally, Sweden's a very great country. We have, great human rights laws and stuff. But it's sort of gone backwards a bit. Like most countries, I think it's really gone. It's become very right wing. And I grew up in a very small town that was quite homophobic. When I was 16, my school announced a no gay prom policy and stuff like that. And so like, coming out was a big thing for me because I'd never met anybody else who'd come out. I didn't know, that you could. I was so afraid. And it going back to the ego, like, I didn't have any healthy confidence at all, which is, I mean, writing has kind of literally saved my life in that sense because it's given me that chance to kind of speak up and um, channel that experience through writing, which has helped me gain confidence. But I was outed at first on social media, and I think I was 18 at the time, and people had mixed reactions. Some friends ostracized me, some people did not. And when I eventually confirmed it, like a couple months later, more people found out. It kind of spread around, and some people had amazing things to say. I was very grateful to have, my mom and my dad who, gave me a hug and were very supportive. Same thing with my sisters. But there were members of my family that did not take it well, and there were, they made that very, very clear to me, and it had some really dark sort of ripple effects on my life. That year, it was the same year that Call Me by Your Name came out, which was a huge turning point for me. I was going through a really rough period after it came out because of the reactions that I got from my family. And I went to see Call Me by Your Name, and it just like broke my heart because it was so beautiful. And it was all about like the whole theme is like, do you speak up or do you die? Like that was the whole theme of that movie. Like when you repress, what are you actually doing to your mental health, and how will speaking up actually liberate you? And so I think I watched it like 4 times in the theater. Like I just cried every time. And it really like it kind of it didn't plant the idea of me wanting to become a writer because I wanted to do that before that. But it did really kind of like that inside of me to apply to film schools in the States. And it kind of had this like amazing, it was a pivotal point for me because it kind of it led me down this path where I'm now. I've lived in the States for over half a decade. And it was sort of thanks to that movie. And so like, yeah, coming out is really hard. And I've been very blessed to be, have been raised in a democracy. I have friends who did not, have that privilege. And, it's been a long journey. And I think sometimes with it comes this, like, again, going back to like the ego, like when we're in a discussion and it's a gay themed story, because I have my lived experience, I can get very defensive about like those topics, even though it doesn't benefit the stories. So it's been a long journey. I've been out now for I think 7 years. And I wanted to work in the film industry to kind of help create a better representation of queer women. I think that there's still a lack. I think we're getting better. We have great movies now. It's really thanks to streamers, thanks to, indie films, we've gotten, very nuanced depictions of lesbians. But for many years, I think the first time I ever saw lesbians in a film was, I think it was that American Pie, the second or first American Pie film, where the main character like walks in on 2 women having sex, and that's all you get, and it's seen from the male point of view, and they're just sex toys. And that was
And
my,
don't they end up both hooking up with the guy?
I
Is
think
it?
so, yeah. It
I
was,
think yeah. I
I
think that's
think
the
so,
resolution of that arc. Yeah.
yeah. And it's very limiting. Like, we're more like, I can't even tell you like the amount of times that I've gone to, like, I've been on a date with a woman, even in gay clubs, and then men come up, they want to get a threesome. They won't let it go. And they don't understand, like, hey, if we've said like, we're fine, we're not gonna like, we'll take a free drink, but we're not gonna fuck you. Like, they just don't seem to get that. And so like when you have stories like that, American Pie movie, It's very kind of it feels very limiting to watch as a lesbian because it's not authentic. It's there's no agency for the female characters. They're just there as sex objects. And when you're forced to kind of see yourself through that lens, it really impacts the way that you view yourself and your own worth. And for many, many years, I struggled with that. I didn't have any self-confidence because I thought of myself as like, an object meant for like, a men to, look at or evaluate. And that's how many people reacted when I came out. And so like I think those kinds of narratives are very um complicated because they don't move the conversation forward. And I think I'm very glad that we have movies like Bottoms right now, and Orange is the New Black was a huge thing. The L Word, I think, has really become, that was a huge thing for queer women as well. Same thing with, I mean, Hacks is a great example too. Like we see bisexual women. Um,
Right, right.
yeah, and we need those stories because when you grow up closeted, and again, I've been very blessed to grow up in a democracy. We got marriage equality when I was 11. Very few gay people can say that, very few people can say that. So that's a huge thing. But even though I grew up in a democracy, it had like insane ripple effects on my mental health. And it goes a lot darker than that, but let's keep it light.
You saw me
But
blinking. You saw me blinking 3 times. I didn't actually. I was enjoying the story so much.
oh, thank you.
And you've cited some really good examples of yes, we are going in a healthy direction. What came to my mind was Big Door Prize, I think it's called, on Apple TV Plus.
I haven't seen it.
Very, very interesting show in general. I would recommend it. There's a character in there who is I think she's the mayor of this very small town,
Hmm.
single parent. She's a black woman and she's a lesbian.
Hmm.
And the way it's done, though, they don't hit you over the head with any of it. It's not
Mhm.
like, look at us doing a diversity play. It's very downplayed and just, no, 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 this is normal life in a small town. Black women can be lesbians. Let's not make a song and a dance of it. And I really appreciated that. I was
Yeah.
watching it like, oh, well done. Well done.
Yeah, because I think on the other end of the spectrum is like we have like a diversity checklist that we have to check off. And it's
Right.
like if you're
Yeah.
just kind of forcing the narrative, you're not actually telling authentic stories,
Yeah, it's kind of the diversity Olympics, isn't it? Like who can get the
yeah,
gold medal for being the most diverse?
right. No, totally. And I think sometimes like in the industry right now, there's more diversity in front of the camera than behind the camera. A lot of queer stories have not always been written by queer people. And I don't necessarily think that is in and of itself wrong, but I think that it is way harder you know, to tell queer stories if you haven't lived it. It's really hard. And so getting like actual queer writers on, staffed on shows has been really crucial, I think, for the industry to actually authentically represent the experience. And so like yeah, it is going in the right direction. Sometimes we tend to get a bit too obsessive. I think as humans we can get right now, especially like we can get a little bit too um aggressive about it. Maybe sometimes people are very easily offended. A lot of gay people are very easily offended. That is a fact. Something
Gays
really,
and lesbians, gay men, lesbian. This is where they do have something in common. They can
yes,
both get offended quite easily.
that is true. That is true. We're working on it.
Hey, but so can straight people. We can get offended very easily as well. So we're all in this together.
We're all in this together. I love that. It is going in the right direction. I think with seeing not just white lesbians, but seeing like the whole gender spectrum, seeing queer people of any race or ethnicity is a huge thing too. And we're getting there. And I think I've seen a huge like progression in terms of like just the last 5, 10 years. Because when I was growing up, we had the L word, but that was the only show. I think the first show that like really made me like understand like, oh, you can actually be queer. It's like it's okay was Orange is the New Black, which I think came out in like 2013 or 12. And that's just like 12 years ago. I mean, things have changed so much. And I think that in the next 10 years, I don't think we'll fully be there, but I think we're going to see a huge change that's going to sort of set the tone for the next generation of filmmakers to come in. And I'm very happy about that because before it was just horrendous to not see yourself anywhere. And so I'm very grateful for the queer people who came in before me and who kind of laid the groundwork. I mean, I owe them my life. I really do.
Where should we go next with it? Because there's more work that we could be doing.
Hmm.
What would you say if you could drill into one specific thing that we need to see more of still? What would that be?
I think, and this is kind of a controversial topic among gay people, but I don't think we necessarily need more coming out stories. I think those are important. I think we have to still talk about it because most people across the world are still really dealing with it, you know. But I think when all we get are like trauma stories, um, it kind of takes away from the rest of our lives because we're more than just gay, you know. We're not just queer. We're human beings with complex emotions. And when all we get are like stories that kind of perpetuate the trauma that we've overcome. If you just want to chill and like unwind and watch something where you see yourself represented, you don't necessarily want to have to relive the thing that you're trying to escape from in the first place. So I think getting stories out there that are about more than just coming out, that's a huge thing for us because we need to, get. I want to see gay people in space. I want to see, I want to see, lesbians just, doing anything beyond.
Lesbians on Mars. There's your new feature.
Yes. I would love to see that. I mean, Dee Reeves should direct that. That would be amazing, you know. That's a huge thing because if all we get are just like if we're trying to escape a horrible day where we've been called, slurs all day, and we just want to see ourselves represented, having to relive the thing that we just came from is like kind of like it kind of defeats the purpose in a sense. So just getting
Mm,
all kinds of stories is really crucial, and I think we're still lacking that.
I agree. And okay, confession time.
Okay.
A couple of years ago, when I was a bit green as a writer, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun to just write whatever I want to write and not think about it? I wrote a feature film about a group of gay people, but it
Wow.
wasn't about them being gay. It was a comedy, it was an action comedy movie similar to Game Night. It
Hmm.
just happened to happen to a group of gay friends.
Wow.
And I love this script. I adore this script. It's some of my best work. No one will do anything with it because I'm straight.
I would love to read it. I would love to.
It wasn't.
It
It wasn't. It wasn't supposed to be a pitch. It may have come across as a pitch.
sounds pretty dope. Like you said, gay people were in what? They were like us. Wait, in space, or what did you say?
They're not. They're not in space. No, that was the lesbians in space. That was
Oh,
the
right.
previous. That was the previous idea. No, this is. It's a very silly film. It's a very
Mhm.
silly comedy action. It's about a guy called. You'll laugh even just at the title because it's ridiculous, but it's supposed to be. So it's about a guy called Homer, and he owns a furniture store called Homer's Sectionals,
I
and
can't read the script. Please send it to me.
he gets embroiled in the local gay mafia because they mistakenly think he committed a crime when he didn't. So he goes from this ordinary gay furniture store owner into this ridiculous mafia adventure where he's fighting for his and his team's life because of a misunderstanding. That's the
Wow.
premise of it. It's
I want to see that.
ridiculous.
I want to watch that. You said homosexual.
Homosexuals.
I mean, if you can get a great gay actor, like it's sold. I want to watch that.
You heard it here first, everybody. There you
Yes.
go. I just wrote it because I thought the same as what you were just saying. I was like, you know what? I haven't seen an action comedy about gay people, but not about being gay. It
Right.
just
And
it just happens to happen to those people, not because they're gay, not because they're coming out. They just get embroiled in something unexpectedly and go on an adventure together.
I mean, it does sound very, very cool. I mean, is that a TV show or is it a feature?
A feature film, yeah,
Feature film.
feature
Wow. I
film.
mean, well, if you can get, a good cast together, that
No
would,
one, no one
yeah.
wants to. My lit manager didn't want to touch it. None of my friends wanted to do anything with it who are in the industry. They're like, yeah, the optics don't work. You're straight. You wrote a gay movie. It's never going to go anywhere.
I think it's a collaboration. Like, again, I'm collaborating right now and I'm the only lesbian on the production, but everyone else has something to add because there's something universal about it. And like, yeah, that is a controversial thing to say, but like, you're not going to be the only person on a production. You can get other gay people on it who can do a gay pass on the script and be like, okay, now it's authentic. Now this is how we
Now we've gayed it up.
we yeah,
We've
yeah.
made it authentically gay rather than what John thinks gay people say.
No, but that's part of the industry. It's like you're not gonna do anything by yourself. Like even if you have
Yeah.
all the more,
Yeah.
like you meet more people. And I think that and I can only speak for the demographic that I represent. I cannot speak for any other minorities. But when it comes to like white cis lesbians, if somebody else writes something about my demographic, I wouldn't necessarily want to shut them down. I would want to read it and then give them notes and then have a conversation about it. You know, that's just me. And again, I cannot speak for any other minority. That is just how I think about my own experiences. I don't mind it personally, but I do think that the conversation needs to be had, and I think that after workshopping, you can still feel like my experience, and so I think that's an important thing too, to have to have the courage to ask and to talk about it.
I
Sure.
agree. Yeah. And just one more thing about that, because I'm remembering now the time of my life that I was going through. I
Mm,
was staying with friends in Phoenix because it was during the pandemic. So it was a little longer than 2 years ago now that I think about it.
mm.
And every single one of my closest friends in Phoenix is gay. And I was spending all day, every day with this group of guys who were all gay. So when I wrote this script, I was in that world 24/7. So it
Wow.
didn't feel like
Mm,
any kind of stretch of the imagination to write the dialogue, to think about what they might do, how they would act. Half the characters are based on my actual friends in real life. Not
wow.
that, I don't know why I'm trying to further explain the concept because it's still a ridiculous script, but
But it sounds pretty dope.
I'm going to send you it just for fun. Um,
Please do, please do. And again, like it's a conversation, and like I think it's a really important one to have because it's better to have it than to not have it. Just in case there is something like, if something's been written that's just like objectively not the queer experience, it's really important to have that, to have someone come in and look at it, or do a pass on it, or get a queer director on it or something. But keep in mind that like it is a collaborative space, and again, you cannot do everything by yourself, and that's just a conversation that needs to be had. But it's more important to have that conversation than to shy away from it. So I think that it's yeah, I think great job. So, I mean, I'm happy that you're bringing it up because it's important to talk about it rather than just like out of shame or whatever, like not even there to address it. I think it's healthier to have a conversation like this than to pretend that, we can't, because I think there needs to be space for mistakes, and there needs to be a space for a dialogue about like what is authentic, and how can you make it authentic if your own experience is limited. Yes, I think it's an important conversation too that needs to be had in this industry. So I'm happy that you're bringing it up.
well, I'm happy that you at least pretended to be interested in the concept of the movie because I think it's a good
It
script.
sounds pretty fun. It sounds really fun.
We'll find out, and then we'll play this clip years from now when it's a cult classic, and this will be the genesis, this will be the origin story, this very interview.
I would love
Okay,
that.
we have come to the part of the episode where we're going to do a new segment. I haven't done this before, but I always get feedback on these episodes, and something that's come up a few times is, John, you're a life coach. You should use that more. You should make your podcast more unique. And I like that idea. One of the ideas that came up was, why don't you ask the guest to ask you a question as what would a writer ask a life coach?
Mm.
If you could ask a life coach any one question. So, because I'm always transparent, I'm going to say, I've already had this conversation with you off camera. You've already told me what your question is going to be.
Yeah,
Let's test it out. Let's see what the
sure.
next 10 minutes of life feels like for us as we go through this. Let's call it Ask a Life Coach segment of the Right in the Head podcast. I'm stumbling through this whole thing, but let's give it a go, shall we?
Sure. So my question is, if you're writing a story about a character whose inner conflict is a bit too close to your own, how do you create enough of a distance between you and that character to be able to tell their stories with clarity?
So, when I first read this question, I was in love with it immediately. Like, it's
Yeah.
so deep and it's so powerful and it's way more than I was expecting. My second kind of gut reaction was, why would you want to distance yourself? Like, go deep, like, get it all out and create this amazingly unique character. And then I paused and I thought, that could be a very painful experience depending on what you've been through and what this character is going to go through. So, just to clarify, I think what you're asking is, yes, you want this character to be based on something you've been through, but you don't want to necessarily relive that thing over and over again as you're writing this. You want to stay clear on what is this story about from that character's perspective. Is that I'm kind of phrasing it back to you
Yeah,
to make sure
yeah,
I'm on the
yeah.
right track here. So I think going back to my previous comment about how I have studied as a hobby, I want to be clear, the body, the brain, how it all works. I mean, it came in very handy when I was life coaching because I want people to understand that almost everything you feel, everything you experience, in fact, not almost, everything you feel and experience comes down to networks in your body, in your brain. And if you can just understand how those are working, you can start to formulate a plan to change your experience. Okay? So in this example, I was thinking of, what's going on in your brain when you're doing this, when you're writing, first and foremost, and then when you're writing about a character that's similar to you. So two things came to mind. There's the default mode network. I had to think there for a second. It's been a long time since I've talked about this. Default mode network. It's a network in the brain that's basically active when you're relaxed, you're daydreaming, you're reflecting on life, you're thinking what it's like to be you. It's a very peaceful, very creative state of mind. This is why oftentimes you get great ideas when you're just not thinking too much, you're in the shower or you're doing the dishes. So default mode network. And then there's the emotional processing systems in the brain. So we might talk about the amygdala. I'm sure you've heard of the amygdala. You seem to be up on your talk of ego, etc. So you've probably heard of this thing called the amygdala. And that's more of your fear response. And that's going to be your stress response. So fight, flight, freeze, anxiety, panic attacks, all of those wonderful things. So when we're writing, it's a really delicate balance between those two, especially if we're writing about something that we are attached to. So the goal here is to fire up that calm, relaxed, creative system and not trip the amygdala too much. So like kind of tiptoeing around that part, because once that gets fired up, we lose that creative insight. And anybody that's ever had an argument knows that feeling. Have you ever noticed that when you're arguing with somebody, you just can't think of anything creative to say, so you just start slinging insults, just go with whatever, and then an hour later when you've calmed down, you're like, oh, that's what I should have said. Why didn't that come to me then? It's because you've gone full-blown amygdala at that point, and that default mode network is kind of offline temporarily. So how do we actually do this? I made a few notes on this. Step one, I would say the best way to uncouple those two networks in the brain is to dissociate yourself from the character by changing part of their identity, and I would say base it on something that you strongly identify as. Okay. Some examples that you might not like to start with, and then we'll talk about some better examples. I strongly identify as a male. So if I didn't care what gender my character was, I would write it female. Because immediately now when I'm telling that story, it doesn't feel like it's my story. I can still give her the same exact trauma, but I'm not reliving it because it's not male. And I'm so heavily identifying as a male, it stops bothering me as much. Now, if you want your character to be female like you are, obviously don't do that because that takes away from the power of the story. But find something else that you strongly identify as and change that. So maybe you strongly identify as being Swedish. Make your character American. That's going to help with some separation.
Yes,
yeah.
It does. Yeah.
Find two or three of those things. So for me, I would say, okay, I'm male, I'm British, and I'm straight. I don't really cling to that at all, but let's just say, so if I made my character gay, American, female, I can probably give her the exact same set of situations, experiences, and traumas that I went through, but I'm still quite detached from it. Making sense?
Yeah, and that actually does help. Like most of my scripts have been around like American women or French women or British women even. So when I do write from like my own like Swedish, lesbian, Californian based, like it just it gets instantly I'm like, I am that person. And it's really hard to like get enough of a distance from them to like write them, because you're like, what would I do in the situation, rather than like what would this
Mhm.
character do in the situation?
And
And so
that's where I think the second step that I would recommend would come in. So it dovetails so nicely with what you were saying. It's create an avatar. And what that would be, I was thinking through how I would do this. I would actually get a photo or a few photos of an actual person, just find them online, create that avatar, and write a character overview or character breakdown, whichever terminology you prefer, from that third person perspective. When you go into the script, you have to kind of put yourself in their mind. What would they do? What would they say? But if it's an avatar, if it's a breakdown, you can do it all from the third party perspective and give the avatar the character name. And now you've got an actual person to refer to from a third party perspective. So again, you're able to give that avatar your experiences, your lived experiences, your trauma, but they're called something else. They've now got a face. They've got this whole backstory mapped out that's not yours. So again, you've put another layer between you and the character before you go into the script itself, where you have to get a bit more up close and personal, right?
I love that. I also heard a version of that where someone told me that, like, picture an actress or an actor, and then write in their voice, because when someone rates it, they're not going to necessarily pick up on that. So like you'll get away with it. Like, don't assume you're going to get that person like to star in your film, but write it in like with them in mind, because that again separates you from them, and you'll see a different face in your head, and then you can write
Mm,
through them in their voice, and it feels like you kind of you make your own version of that actress or that actor, and
yeah.
that can also give you that separation, which is crucial when you're a writer.
Yeah,
So
and side note, that can also really help with your dialogue because it will be
yes.
consistent because you'll just keep thinking of that same person. So I remember the first script that I wrote, one of the lead characters in it, you might even notice this if you read it today. It was almost entirely based on Jason Bateman because I just like his style of comedy.
It's
So
nice.
some of the lines were just, yeah, you could have lifted that straight from Arrested Development. And it helped me to get the character down and to write consistently for that character because I was doing it all as Jason Bateman. And I would
I
love him
love
to play that
that.
character. It's never going to
Yeah.
happen, but it did.
It could
It did
happen.
make the character clearly defined, at least.
It could happen.
Not with that particular script. I'm just going to be honest. That was
Someday.
in the early days. And then I think the third thing I wrote down here that I do want to just spit out is so you've kind of given them some different identities, which helps that first layer of separation. You've created your avatar so that you've got an actual person to think about. The third thing is more the practical steps of actually writing the script. It's amazing what you can do in short bursts of writing. And neurologically, that's really going to help you out because the amygdala, if it's an immediate threat, it's very quick to react. But if it's just that kind of gradually building up like white noise in the background, you can get away with it for a while if you then take a break and allow it to ramp down again. So if you're writing for an hour or two at a time, that's going to get quite intense and those things are going to start to come up for you. But if you write for 20 minutes and then take 10 minutes to just do some deep breathing, go for a walk, get some sunlight, that's going to bring you right back down into that default mode network, feeling calm, feeling peaceful, ready to go again. So that's the final kind of step for me if I was to do this would be aware of how I'm feeling as I'm writing and don't push it for too long,
I,
just so you can stay in that relaxed state.
do you set a timer for that?
I personally would go with 20 on, 10 off, but I
Mm.
haven't, I'll be honest, I haven't done this through this lens before. I haven't written a character that has the same trauma that I've been through. I mean, loosely, yes, but not in a way that really caused me a lot of concern because I write mainly comedy. So
Mm.
I've done the times 20 on, 10 off purely when I'm just having a tired day and I'm being cautious of how I'm feeling and where my stress levels are.
Yeah.
Very useful for that. And I'll use things like in that 10-minute break, I'll do something called a physiological sigh. Anybody that's heard anything by Andrew Huberman will know all about this because he talks about them all the time. But it's a very, very deep breath in until you feel like your lungs are quite full. and then another sharp inhale to really max out your lung capacity, and then a very slow exhale. I do two, maybe three of those, and I feel so calm. It is like
That.
actual magic. All credit to Huberman for that one. I did not create that, unfortunately. So yeah, 10 minutes of doing that kind of thing, like you were mentioning earlier, your meditation, yoga, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Just a quick, a few minutes of that to calm down again before I go back into writing. And I find that I'm able to stay creative and not get too stressed.
I'm gonna try that for sure. That does sound like a very good, like kind of a little break for your brain before in between your writing shifts. I'm gonna
It's
give it.
very handy, and it also helps you to kind of assimilate and to process, because I'm sure you've done this when you're writing and you get to a point where you're not quite sure what's coming next.
Yeah.
And I think for a few minutes you do need to sit in that discomfort, because that's what's telling your brain this is something that's important to me. If you just get up and walk away immediately, then you're just delaying and not really overcoming. But if you kind of get that feeling of banging your head against the wall for a few minutes and then you take a break and don't think about it, your subconscious is processing. It's joining dots for you. And you'll be amazed how many times during those 10 minutes you suddenly get this, oh, that's what I should do next. And then you're right back to it, and you've got another great 20 minutes ahead of you.
I'm gonna start doing that. I mean, starting today. That sounds like a very good solution to it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, let me know how you get on with all of this, because, like I said, I haven't done this from the perspective of
Mm,
somebody writing about a character that's closely connected to them. So all of this is theory based on, my very limited knowledge of how your brain is operating and what causes stress response versus the
mm,
calm and creative state of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is what we're always trying to.
yeah.
I think what we want is that balance of relaxed but focused. That's kind of how it needs to feel.
I'll let you know. I'm gonna try it and see what comes out.
Please do. I'm sure we'll keep in touch. I almost every time I do an episode like this, I want to reach out and say, "Hey, let's do part two," because I'm enjoying these conversations so much.
Yeah, I think that. I think that. Oh.
Where can people go if they want to find out more about you and the writing you're doing and life in general? Are you on social media? Can they follow you? Do you have a website? What's the best links to include in the description?
Actually, I'm only on LinkedIn. I had to prioritize my mental health a while back, so I'm only on that platform.
I
But
love that so much.
yeah,
So much.
so my name is Lily Malm, and yeah, that's the only platform that I'm on. But I'm happy to chat on that platform.
Yes, I mean, that's how we met. I think it was a comment you'd left on one of my posts, or
I think so. Yeah,
something I saw that you had posted. I don't remember the details now, but
something like that. Yeah, happy
I
to chat.
am I am determined to eventually get LinkedIn to sponsor this podcast, because I talk about it so often. It's one of the best tools, I think, for
Yes,
even
yes.
creators like us. You wouldn't think it, but honestly, I've had made so many good connections on LinkedIn. I think it's a great platform.
Friends that I send scripts to, and we trade notes all the time. And it's like I've never met them in person. I've just met them on LinkedIn because it's a resource
Same here.
yeah, for
Yeah.
creative.
Yeah, it's how I got my lit manager. It's how I met the producer that I sold my first project through. It's been so helpful, so
It's been
helpful.
pivotal for me too. Yeah.
Yeah, and it means I don't have to go to any actual networking event. I'm kidding, I do go to those as well. But sometimes you just want to stay home in your pajamas and do some
The
networking.
comfort of your bed, with a
Yeah,
blanket. It's
yeah,
neat.
digital networking while eating soup and watching a movie. That's great. I love
That's
that.
the best. I love that.
All right, let's wrap it up. Thank you so much for your time and your input and that question you asked me, which was just so powerful, mind-blowingly. So, what a great start to the new segment of the episode of the show. I hope it goes well from here. But yeah, thanks again, and yeah, keep in touch. I'm sure part two will come around soon.
Yes, and congrats on your 20th episode. That's huge.
We'll be looking back on this when I've done 100 and then
Oh
200 and
yeah.
500, and yeah. But yeah, 2020 feels
You'll
good.
get there for sure. You'll get there.
I think so. I
I
think
think
so.
so too.
Even if the next 480 episodes are just with you, I just keep inviting you back. Just
Aw,
like,
I would love to come back.
what are we talking about this time?
Oh yeah.
All right, take care, and yeah, we'll talk again soon for sure.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Bye.